Picture in your mind the ultimate 35mm film camera. What do you see? What does the spec sheet look like? Hey, X-Pan doesn't count. I have, in my possession, the best 35mm film camera ever made. But it doesn't have any auto exposure modes, it doesn't have autofocus, and in fact, it doesn't have any features at all. That's right, it's the ultimate photo making machine, the Pentax K1000. And I'm going to explain to you why it's the best camera in the entire universe, bar none, apart from every camera that everyone mentions in the comment section that I didn't think of. To understand where I'm coming from with this, I think we need to talk about why we shoot film in the first place. Most people say that they shoot film because it makes them more intentional. It helps them slow down and consider each shot and be a little bit more picky with their composition. And people say, you know, film is a more involved process and it requires more input from the photographer creatively. The funny thing about this is, the more features and tech you pack into an analog camera, the further away from the truth these things become. Nobody is allowed to say, I shoot film to slow down if they use a Nikon F6. And that's the first thing of many about the K1000 is that it's got nothing to distract you. It's the purest form of making photos. It's got no depth of field preview, it's got no autofocus, it's got no shutter priority, aperture priority, self-timer, nothing. Literally the only controls on the camera are shutter speed and an ISO dial and the shutter. Obviously there's aperture as well, but that's on the lens. And it's not just from an art perspective that this camera is loaded. Sorry, Editor Hunter. It keeps it simple mechanically too. It has a battery, but you only need the battery to run the light meter. All of the shutter speeds and everything else works fully mechanically. So no matter where you are or how long this thing has been sitting in a box in the attic, you crank the rewind lever and press the shutter, it will go off every time. And yes, it is that reliable. It's built like a tank. It's not that accurate in terms of shutter speeds, but it is literally built like the Killdozer. From what I can tell, my particular K1000 was made somewhere in the late 1980s, and although I can't directly figure out if it was produced in Hong Kong or Japan, my suspicion is it was made in Japan because everything is immaculate. Everything inside the camera is immaculate, and it has never needed anything done to it. It's also, I think, a very pretty camera. Sure, it's not exactly sleek, it's sort of more brutalist. It's a big, heavy hunk of metal that you can really feel in your hands.
Heavy, isn't it?
Heavy is good. Heavy is reliable. If it doesn't work, you can always hit him with it.
I know. Don't think for a second that I don't know that you're down there in the comments typing the L word as we speak. Don't shoot. I think that this camera is better than a Leica, and please hold the pitchforks while I explain. Leica make gorgeous cameras, and I've had the privilege to shoot on them several times, and they are amazing pieces of technology, but they're expensive as hell. Speaking of, if you like this video and subscribe, not only will it get me a little bit closer to being able to afford a Leica, but it'll also mean that we can hang out and talk about cameras more often. And that's kind of how we get to value. See, the thing about the K1000 is, sure, the K1000 itself is an absolute steal. I mean, you can pick one of these things up for like 150 bucks on eBay, but the lenses are also unbelievably available and cheap. And personally, I think that this particular era of K-mount lenses have a very sort of specific, creamy, gooey look to them while still maintaining decent sharpness and contrast. The colors are lovely, and it really does feel like a nostalgic lens. And they're cheap. The 28, for example, costs like £50. So, hear me out. Not only can you pick up a K1000 for cheap, they're better than Leicas because, unless you're Mr. Moneybags, you probably can't afford multiple Leicas, let alone a giant array of Leica lenses. K1000, on the other hand, because it's so affordable and there are so many of them, inspires confident and risk-taking photography. I know that in the worst case scenario of this camera being stolen or smashed to bits, I can buy another one probably the same day and not break a sweat. And the same thing can't be said for the very lovely Leica M11 House Deposit Edition. And as a result, I feel much more free to take this thing anywhere, whether that's the beach, riots, football games, whatever. And look, I understand there's the Nikon F3, there's the Pentax LX, the Canon F1, and those are all amazing cameras that share a lot of the things that make the Pentax K1000 great. Those cameras are work tools and they were built for professionals. And that sounds like a great thing, and it does make them great cameras, but when you're using a camera for fun and just for daily life photography and taking pictures of your friends, that extra tiny little layer of complexity with any camera can just pull you away from the moment a little bit more. Here's the thing. This is where I think the K1000 really shines. The K1000, yeah, it does give you an extremely pure shooting experience without fiddling with any settings or dials, which is great for people who use cameras for work all day, like myself, because we don't have to think about menus or media or backups. But it also makes this a stellar camera for beginners. It doesn't allow for any confusion, and while you're learning, simple is good. The light meter is the perfect example of this, and to this date, I've never found a light meter that I like as much as this one, because it visually moves as you change exposure settings. It gives you like physical visual feedback of what each change you're making on the camera does to the amount of light you're getting. But more than that, it has a pretty wide range in like the good exposure portion of the light meter. It's like kind of half a stop or maybe 3/4 of a stop on each side. And some people would think that's a bad thing, but I think it's a good thing. I think too many light meters give you a very specific result, and that sort of can be a little constricting. And I think having it a bit more freeform and just somewhere in this general region, A, helps beginners get over settings paralysis much easier, and B, it's just more intuitive. It's easier to do without thinking about photography. I bang on about this all the time. When you're shooting film, you need to forget about settings entirely and just focus on setting. Actually, that reminds me, if you're looking to get into film photography, but you've got a list of questions as long as your arm, I've just launched a Film Photography 101 course, which is designed to specifically answer all of those questions so that you can go into shooting your first roll confident, whether you've got experience on digital or none at all. There's a link in the description and in the pinned comment on this video, so check it out. I've made it super affordable and super easy to follow. But ultimately, I think the coolest thing about the K1000 is this. If you don't believe me, buy one and try it for yourself. They're actually going up in value and not down at the moment, so you could buy one for a weekend or a month or a road trip and put a few rolls through it and then see how you feel. You literally have nothing to lose by trying this camera out. Maybe you could even try pushing Kodak Gold to ISO 800 with it, which I did with surprisingly cool results in this video. I think this way, right? Or this video. There's a video. Stay hydrated and create art.